The morning air at Denver International Airport shimmered with a golden hue as travelers bustled through the gates, wheeling carry-ons and clutching coffee cups. Flight 282 to Chicago was boarding at Gate C-23. For most of the 147 passengers, it was just another flight, a short 2-hour journey to reconnect with family, return to business, or make a layover. But for one teenager seated quietly in row 17, this flight would become something far greater, something history would never forget. Emily Clark sat by the window, her backpack tucked beneath the seat in front of her, earbuds loosely hanging around her neck. At 17, she looked like any other high school senior. Hoodie, jeans, quiet demeanor. She was flying alone for the first time since her father's death, traveling to spend spring break with her older sister in Chicago. Her mom had hugged her twice at the security line. "Text me the moment you land," she'd said. Emily had nodded and smiled, hiding the twinge of nervousness that always came with goodbyes. As the plane pushed back from the gate and began taxiing, Emily reached into her backpack and pulled out a worn folded flight manual, not for a commercial jet, but for a Cessna 172, her father's favorite plane. He'd given her the manual when she was 12, scribbling notes in the margins, quizzing her on airspeed and altitude control during weekend flights. While other kids were learning dance routines on TikTok, Emily had been in a flight simulator, banking left, adjusting trim, and calculating descent rates. Her dad, Air Force Captain Thomas Clark, had died in a highway accident just 2 years ago. A drunk driver had taken his life, but not before giving Emily a passion for the skies. He always said, "One day the world might throw something crazy at you. Be the calmest voice in the sky." She never forgot it. The plane lifted into the sky smoothly, climbing through the soft clouds. Emily leaned her head against the window, watching the earth shrink below. Row 17 was midway down the cabin, nestled between families, a few college students, and an older man reading the Wall Street Journal. Across the aisle, a young couple whispered excitedly about their engagement. Everything was normal, routine. The seat belt signs dinged off. A flight attendant passed by offering pretzels and soda. Emily declined politely, returning her gaze to the view. She felt at peace up here. No homework, no text, no grief, just sky. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of the flight manual on her lap, the smell of jet fuel and recycled air strangely comforting. Then, at precisely 30 Zalazarfaf, something changed. It was subtle at first. A faint flicker of the cabin lights like a power surge. The engine noise softened slightly, barely noticeable. The intercom crackled once, then nothing. Emily's ears perked up. She looked around. A few other passengers noticed, too. The flight attendant in the forward galley tapped her earpiece and frowned, trying to hail the cockpit. 10 seconds passed, then 20. No announcements, no updates. The plane flew steady, but something was off. Must be a technical glitch. The man in 17 muttered, folding his newspaper. Emily's eyes narrowed. Her instincts, shaped by hundreds of hours in simulators, told her something was wrong, more than just a power flicker. The lead flight attendant walked quickly down the aisle toward the cockpit, rapping sharply on the door. "Captain," she called. No answer. She knocked harder. "Captain Harper, First Officer Dade." Silence. She turned pale-faced and picked up the interphone again. Nothing. Passengers began murmuring. One man stood only to be asked to sit back down. A child started crying 2 rows ahead. The mood shifted slowly, like water beginning to boil. Emily sat still, heart thudding. She looked down at the manual on her lap. Her fingers tightened around its edges. Up front, the flight attendant turned toward the cabin. "Is there a doctor on board?" she asked aloud, though her voice trembled. Not with medical concern, but with the weight of something she couldn't explain. The plane was still flying. The autopilot held it steady, but something deep in Emily's bones told her, no one is flying this plane anymore. The silence in the cabin grew heavier with each passing second. The soft hum of the engines continued, but there was something unnatural about the stillness. No announcements, no smiling voice from the cockpit to assure everyone it was just a technical hiccup. The calm that once filled the aircraft now felt eerie, like everyone was collectively holding their breath. Flight attendants exchanged glances that said more than words. One of them, a younger woman with a trembling hand, picked up the intercom again, pressed a few buttons, and tapped the mic. It didn't respond. The little green light that normally flicked on remained dark. A man near row 10 stood tall and anxious. "What's going on up there?" he called out, voice strained. "We're checking now, sir," the lead attendant answered, trying to stay composed. But Emily could see the tightness in her jaw. This wasn't normal. Then came the thud. It wasn't loud, but enough to make heads turn. The flight attendant at the cockpit door had knocked harder with urgency. "Captain Harper." She shouted louder this time. "Captain. Respond." She turned to the other attendant behind her and whispered something. The second attendant dashed down the aisle toward the rear, likely heading for the emergency access kit. Emily's stomach tightened. Something was wrong. Not just a broken speaker or a minor comms glitch. The pilots weren't answering. The intercom system wasn't working, and now the attendants were looking for keys. The man in 17A leaned over toward Emily. "Is this part of the flight?" he asked quietly, almost joking, trying to dispel his own nerves. Emily didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the cockpit door. Her mind raced. A mechanical fault, a hijack, a rapid decompression. No. She would have felt that. Then a terrifying thought crept in. What if the pilots are unconscious? That's when she saw it. The flight attendant returning from the rear of the plane with a silver box marked emergency access. It held tools, oxygen tanks, and a key card for the cockpit override, something used only in extreme cases. Emily's heart pounded. Her dad had talked about this once. If both pilots became incapacitated, a passenger with aviation knowledge could potentially help stabilize the aircraft long enough for air traffic control to issue instructions. It was rare, nearly impossible, but not unthinkable. The flight attendant used the override and cracked open the cockpit door slowly, her hand covering her nose. She gasped and pushed it fully open, revealing what no one on board could have expected. Both pilots slumped in their seats, motionless. "Get oxygen up here now," she shouted. Passengers started panicking. Someone screamed. Another person stood and reached for the overhead bin, fumbling for something. "Anything." Emily stood, her instincts overriding fear. She stepped into the aisle, gripping the seatbacks. "For balance, is it the pilots?" she asked the flight attendant directly. "They're out cold. We think it's a gas leak, maybe carbon monoxide. Cabin's still pressurized, but the cockpit." Her voice cracked. "They're not responsive." Emily didn't hesitate. "I know how to fly," she said, her voice more confident than she felt. The attendant looked her over. Teenager, hoodie, backpack, way too young to be talking like a pilot. "My dad was Air Force. I've flown real planes, small ones and sims. I know this isn't the same, but I can read instruments and I know how to talk to ATC." The flight attendant hesitated. For a moment, the only sounds were murmurs and the soft rush of air through the vents. Finally, she nodded. "Come with me." As Emily followed her toward the cockpit, 147 lives watched in stunned silence. A teenage girl was stepping into the pilot's seat, and the plane was still flying itself for now. The cockpit smelled faintly metallic, tinged with something sharper, a hint of chemicals that made Emily instinctively cover her nose. The flight attendant reached for the emergency oxygen masks tucked near the pilot's seats and helped Emily slip one over her face. It was cold and awkward, but necessary. Both pilots were breathing, barely unconscious but alive. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she stepped between them, scanning the glowing instrument panels. It looked overwhelming, alien even, but not unfamiliar. Her father had shown her the layouts of jet cockpits once. She remembered the mantra, scan, don't stare. Trust your training. Her eyes moved across the displays. Autopilot active, altitude 30,000 feet holding, heading drifting slightly off course. Fuel good, engines stable. But no comms and both pilots were still out. The headset lay crooked on the co-pilot's seat. Emily reached for it and adjusted the mic near her mouth. "Mayday, mayday," she said, her voice tight but clear. "This is Flight 282. Pilots are unconscious. I am a passenger. I have limited flying experience, requesting immediate assistance." She waited. Nothing, just the low buzz of instruments and the faint sound of air circulating. "Try again," the attendant urged, handing her a laminated radio frequency chart. Emily scanned it, switching to the emergency frequency her dad once drilled into her memory. She repeated the call. This time the static cracked to life. "Flight 282. This is Chicago Center." "Say again," Emily exhaled in relief. "This is Emily Clark, passenger, seated in row 17. Both pilots are unconscious. I'm in the cockpit. I've flown single-engine aircraft. I can follow instructions. Please advise." There was a long pause as if the controller needed a second to process what he just heard. "Copy that, Emily. We're alerting emergency response. You're not alone. We're going to help you every step of the way." Emily nodded to herself, her fingers tightening around the yoke. "Okay, just tell me what to do." Back in the cabin, passengers sat in stunned silence. A man near the front asked, "Did they say a girl's flying us now?" A woman clutched her rosary. One little boy whispered to his mother, "Can she do it?" The flight attendants moved quickly to calm people down, repeating only what they knew for sure, that someone was in control. But the truth that a teenager was flying a commercial airliner was almost too unbelievable to say aloud. Back in the cockpit, Chicago Center guided Emily step by step. "Maintain heading 085. Confirm autopilot still engaged." "Autopilot engaged." "Heading 085 confirmed." Emily responded, her voice gaining strength. "You're doing great, Emily. Can you see if either pilot is responsive?" She glanced at the captain. No movement. She touched his shoulder gently. "Sir," no reply. The co-pilot moaned faintly but didn't wake. "They're still out," Emily reported. "Understood. We're diverting all other aircraft. You'll land at O'Hare. Do not descend until instructed." Emily acknowledged. She sat straighter now, adjusting the seat. She recognized more and more of the instruments. Artificial horizon, vertical speed indicator, throttle controls. Her dad's lessons swam back into focus like muscle memory, waking from a long sleep. She remembered he once told her as they flew together in a simulator, "You don't fight the plane, you fly with it. It wants to fly. Let it." She took a deep breath. The aircraft was stable. The systems weren't failing. She had help from the ground. She could do this. Outside the cockpit windows, the sky stretched endlessly in every direction. The sun glinted off the engine casing, and far below, the heartland of America rolled quietly beneath her, unaware that the lives of 147 passengers now rested in the hands of a girl who wasn't even old enough to vote, but she was her father's daughter. And in this moment, that meant everything. Emily adjusted the headset again, her fingers slick with sweat. The low hum of the engines reminded her that the autopilot still held strong. But this moment felt like a countdown. The longer she stayed at cruising altitude, the closer she got to having to take full control. She took one final glance at the unconscious pilots, both still breathing but unmoving. Their masks had slipped slightly. She readjusted them gently. "Chicago Center, this is Emily," she said into the mic, trying to sound as calm as possible. "I need to know how to manually take over if autopilot fails." The voice on the other end responded with professional clarity. "Understood, Emily. We're going to walk you through everything. You're doing remarkably well. Let's begin by confirming your autopilot system and settings." She looked at the panel. A glowing green button labeled AP active, altitude locked, heading stable. A line of text blinked just below, nav hold engaged. ICP heading 085, altitude 30,000 locked, speed is steady, she reported. Perfect. That's what we want for now. You're flying a Boeing 737-800. Most systems are automated, but when we approach final descent, we'll begin transferring control to you manually. Do not rush. Emily nodded, her chest tight. Below, the clouds thinned. The land came into better focus. A few tears pressed at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. Not now. Later. In the cabin, the murmurs had changed to prayers, questions, and stunned whispers. One passenger, a retired firefighter from Kansas City, stood up and tried to make his way to the front, but a flight attendant gently blocked him. Please sit, sir. I'm not trying to cause panic, he said, voice low. I just want to know if we're really being flown by a girl. She's not just a girl, the flight attendant said firmly. She's the reason we're still in the air. That answer spread down the aisle faster than turbulence. Some passengers were shocked, others inspired. One woman whispered to the man beside her, I've never prayed for someone I didn't know before. Back in the cockpit, Emily adjusted her seat forward, feeling dwarfed by the panel, but determined to own it. Her hands hovered over the yoke. It was heavier than the ones she knew, not plastic and light like the simulators. This felt real because it was Emily. We're going to prepare you to disengage autopilot when we give the signal. Do not do it yet. First, familiarize yourself with the throttle and flap controls. They're on the center console. She located the throttle levers, black handles curved like horns, flaps labeled with a white dial beside them. I see them, she confirmed. Good. You'll only need to adjust them when we begin final approach. We're clearing your descent path now. Emily exhaled deeply. Copy. She looked out the windshield. The horizon stretched wide, clouds drifting gently beneath them like a sea. In the distance, two dark shapes emerged, F-16 jets. We've got visual confirmation, the controller said. You're being joined by Air National Guard escorts. They'll fly beside you as you descend. It's just backup. You've got this. A lump formed in Emily's throat. Roger that. Inside the jet, people pressed their faces to the windows, stunned to see military aircraft flying in formation just off the wings. The tension, the disbelief, it all felt surreal. A 17-year-old girl was preparing to fly them home, and the United States Air Force was backing her up. Emily, the voice said through the headset again. You're going to make history today. We'll begin your descent in the next 10 minutes. When you're ready, we'll walk you through every second. She gripped the yoke lightly. Her voice was steady now. I'm ready. She didn't know if that was entirely true, but she knew one thing for certain. She would not let her father down. Down in the radar rooms and control towers of Chicago, the news spread fast. An untrained civilian, a teenage girl, had taken the pilot seat of a commercial Boeing 737. The FAA issued immediate emergency protocols. Two F-16 fighter jets had already locked onto Flight 282's position and flanked it from either side. News outlets scrambled. Networks broadcast breaking updates. Teenage passenger attempts to land jet after pilot's collapse. Inside the cockpit, Emily didn't hear any of it. All she had was the headset, the hum of the instruments, and her own steadying breath. Emily, we've cleared runway 4TL at O'Hare, the controller said calmly. Your descent will begin shortly. You're going to disengage autopilot on my count. Keep your hand light on the yoke, firm on throttle. We'll guide you step by step. Copy, Emily replied. Behind her, one of the flight attendants stood just inside the cockpit door, watching silently. She wasn't just making sure Emily was okay. She was standing as a witness to something extraordinary. Emily reached forward. Her fingers hovered over the autopilot button. She thought of her dad's voice again. Planes want to fly. Just help them land. Disengage autopilot in 3021. Now click. The aircraft gently rocked as Emily took manual control. For a second, her breath caught. The feeling was different, heavier than anything she'd flown before. But then muscle memory took over. She guided the yoke with care, making micro-adjustments to keep the plane level. "You're doing perfect," the controller's voice reassured. "Descend to 24,000 feet. Pull throttle back slightly. Watch your vertical speed." Emily adjusted as instructed. The altimeter began ticking down. Her pulse surged with it. In the cabin, the announcement came, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. One of our passengers, a trained civilian, is flying the plane with assistance from air traffic control. We ask that you remain calm and follow instructions." Gasps echoed through the aisle. Then came silence. A woman in 22C whispered, "She's flying us. A teenager is flying us." Someone murmured, "God help her." Another replied, "God help us all." But strangely, as the seconds passed, the cabin didn't erupt into panic. Instead, people began to trust. Maybe it was the calm in the attendant's voice, or the way the aircraft still moved smoothly through the clouds. The Air National Guard jets flew in close formation. One pilot radioed the tower visual confirmation. "Civilian appears in control. Jet remains stable on the ground." The story had already gone viral. Emily Clark's name appeared across headlines. Her middle school photo, the most recent the media could find, flashed on screens worldwide. "Who is Emily Clark?" they asked. "A pilot's daughter becomes a nation's hope." But Emily wasn't thinking about any of that. "Approaching 20,000 feet, she reported. "Excellent. Begin adjusting flaps to position 5. She turned the dial slowly. The aircraft responded with a subtle shift, slowing slightly. "Reduce speed to 250 knots. You're doing amazing, Emily." She let out a breath. "Okay." Flaps adjusted, speed coming down. "Good. Next checkpoint." 10,000 feet. Emily wiped sweat from her brow. The oxygen mask itched, the headset pressed tight against her skull, and every muscle in her arms screamed from tension, but she never let go of the yoke. "You were made for this," she told herself. Dad made sure of it. Back in the cabin, the little girl in row 15 turned to her mother. "She's brave," she whispered. "She's a miracle," the mother replied, her voice cracking. At 15,000 feet, the clouds broke, and there it was, the skyline of Chicago, glinting like glass. The runway stretched ahead like a narrow promise. "Emily," the controller said, "you're going to land this plane. We'll bring you home." And Emily, jaw tight, hands steady, simply answered, "Let's finish this." The city unfolded beneath her like a living map, grids of roads, tiny cars, the glittering sweep of Lake Michigan stretching into the horizon. Emily's knuckles were white on the yoke. Her breathing was steady, but each exhale sounded like thunder in her headset. "Emily, you're cleared for final approach," said the calm voice from Chicago Center. "Reduce speed to 190 knots. Begin gradual descent to 3,000 feet." "Roger that," Emily replied, voice calm, but her chest tight. She adjusted the throttle, easing it back. The engines responded with a subtle whine, and the aircraft's nose began to lower. Out of the corner of her eye, the two F-16s still flanked her like guardian angels in gray armor. "Begin extending flaps to position 10, the controller instructed. Emily reached down and turned the flap dial with precision. Her hands moved with purpose now, not flawlessly, but with care and memory. In her mind, her father's voice played like a ghost in the cockpit. "On approach, feel the air. You're not just flying, you're listening." Her eyes flicked across the panel. Altitude steady, speed dropping, no alerts. She was in control. Inside the cabin, the passengers braced in silence. The nose of the plane had dipped slightly. The city now visible beyond the windows. A wave of gasps rippled through the rows as the Chicago skyline emerged, the Sears Tower, the blue of the lake. The long black line of O'Hare runways in the distance. "She's bringing us in," someone whispered. "She's really doing it." A man in row 5 began to cry openly, hands clenched around the armrests. A teenager was about to land a 90,000 lb jet with 147 people aboard, and there was nothing anyone could do but believe. "Gear down," the controller said. Dot. Emily moved her hand to the gear lever, pulling it down slowly. She felt the aircraft vibrate slightly. As the landing gear deployed, a row of green lights on the panel lit up. "Gear down and locked," she confirmed. "Flaps to 30. Adjust pitch slightly upward. You're doing perfect." "I've got visual on the runway," Emily said, eyes narrowing toward the long gray strip cutting across the city below. The jet was descending smoothly ahead. O'Hare International looked like a nervous audience holding its breath. Emergency vehicles lined the tarmac. Red trucks, yellow lights flashing, foam rigs ready, all waiting for a teenager to defy the odds. Speed 150 knots, slight right correction heading 149. She adjusted course, the nose swaying slightly as the runway centered in her view. The plane responded heavy but willing. Altitude 1500 feet, looking good. Emily blinked away sweat, every muscle locked in focus. Her fingers gripped the yoke, her shoes firm on the rudder pedals, even if she barely needed them yet. She wasn't just flying the plane, she was the plane. Every breath matched the hum of the engines. "Emily," the voice in her ear said, quieter now. "There are 147 people counting on you, but don't think about them. Just land this like you've done 100 times with your dad." She exhaled. Copy. At 1,000 feet, Emily began her final alignment. The ground rushed up fast, faster than it ever had in a Cessna. Buildings blurred past and the runway widened like open arms. "Throttle back slightly. Keep nose level. You're on glide slope." She eased the throttle down. The plane responded with a slow, sinking grace. Flare at 20 feet. The moment was near. Her eyes didn't blink, her hands didn't shake. Dot. In the cabin, silence turned to prayer. People bowed their heads, held hands, gripped seats. And through it all, they felt it. Not just fear, but awe. Emily Clark, 17 years old, had brought them this far. Now she only had to land. The runway stretched wide ahead of her, shimmering in the afternoon light. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. Every breath was calculated, every muscle locked in place. Below 500 feet, there was no more time for fear, only action. "Throttle to idle," came the voice from the tower. "Idle confirmed." Emily answered and gently pulled the throttle back. The aircraft slowed, and she began to feel the weight shifting. The nose dipped. The runway widened like a final invitation. "Prepare to flare at 20 feet," Emily counted. $5.40 or 30 or 20 of dot. She gently pulled the yoke back. Not too hard, just enough to lift the nose slightly. Her fingers trembled, but her motion was steady, graceful. The main wheels touched down first with a hard thud, not smooth but stable. The rear jolted, and for a split second, the plane bounced, threatening to tilt. Dot. Emily held on. Then the nose came down, slamming into the runway with a jolt that sent a gasp through the cabin. The tires screeched. The aircraft skidded slightly left, but she corrected quickly with the rudder pedals, steadying the jet as it barreled down the strip. "Brakes, Emily. Easy on the pedals," the tower advised. She applied pressure gently. Steadily, the engines roared in reverse thrust, slowing the aircraft faster now. The runway rushed past in a blur. Emergency vehicles to the left, foam crews standing ready. The plane slowed, the shaking stopped. Dot. And then silence, rolling wheels, a full stop. The aircraft came to a complete halt at the end of runway 40L for one suspended second. Nothing happened. No one spoke. No one breathed. Then from the rear of the cabin, a voice shouted, "She did it!" The cabin exploded into cheers, applause, tears. A woman sobbed openly. A father hugged his son. A man dropped to his knees and clasped his hands to the sky. The flight attendants ran to the cockpit. One of them opened the door, just as Emily slumped back into the seat, her hands falling away from the yoke, her eyes glassy with shock and adrenaline. "Emily," the woman said, kneeling beside her. "Emily, you're okay." "I did it. I landed," Emily whispered. "I actually landed it." She didn't cry. Not yet. she couldn't. Her body still buzzed with the sound of engines and wind and voices in her head. She felt like she was still flying. Emergency crew boarded quickly. Paramedics rushed to the cockpit, lifting the unconscious pilots from their seats. Oxygen was administered immediately. One of them stirred, heart rate strong. A medic. They're coming around. But everyone's eyes, even the professionals, kept drifting back to the girl in the pilot's seat, 17, alone. And now, a hero outside the aircraft. Reporters had already begun gathering behind barriers. The footage from the tarmac, a commercial jet stopped mid-runway, escorted by fighter jets. Emergency lights flashing had already made national headlines. Helicopter crews zoomed in on the scene. A close see-up of the cockpit showed a single figure sitting inside. Small, calm, staring forward. Emily Clark, the name had already started trending. Fat Pilotin Row 7 Emily landed at Faro Flight 282 back inside as passengers disembarked. Many stopped beside the cockpit to look in, not to see damage but to see her. Some said nothing, others placed trembling hands over their hearts. An older woman whispered, "Thank you for bringing me home." Emily just nodded. She still didn't fully believe it herself. The final passenger left. The jet sat still in the middle of O'Hare's busiest runway, surrounded by flashing lights and crews. In the cockpit, Emily finally unbuckled her harness and stood outside. Cameras waited, but before stepping off the plane, she reached into her hoodie pocket, pulled out a photo of her father, worn, creased, and tucked it behind the instrument. "Penel, you were right, Dad," she said softly. "The world did throw something crazy at me." Then she opened the door and stepped out into history. The sun was setting by the time Emily Clark finally left the runway, wrapped in a silver thermal blanket. Flanked by emergency responders, she descended the air stairs to a crowd that had gathered behind barriers at the edge of the tarmac. Reporters, ground crew, police, and camera operators from nearly every major network. She blinked at the flashbulbs, overwhelmed by the noise, the attention, the surreal magnitude of what had happened. But she kept walking. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She was still inside that cockpit, still clutching the yoke in her mind. Paramedics offered her water. One of the military escorts, a young Air Force captain, approached her and saluted. "Miss Clark," he said with reverence, "my squadron watched that entire landing. What you did was textbook." Emily barely nodded. "It was a lot," she said quietly. "You brought them home," he replied. "You're a pilot now, whether you have the license or not." Hours later, she was taken to a press room inside O'Hare where a dozen microphones waited. Her mother had been flown in on a red eye and rushed to her side. When she saw Emily, she broke down in tears and held her like she never wanted to let go. "I thought I lost you," her mom sobbed. "I thought I was going to lose me, too," Emily whispered. Then, at 20:30 a.m., she stood in front of the world. News outlets from every country tuned in. Her name trended globally. The FAA director made a public statement. "WAO are launching a full investigation into the cause of pilot incapacitation. But make no mistake, Emily Clark's actions today saved 147 lives." She stepped up to the microphone in her hoodie, eyes red but clear. "I didn't think I could do it," she admitted. "But I heard my dad's voice the whole time. He trained me for this. Not for a real jet, but for the idea that you don't run from fear, you fly through it." One reporter asked, "What will you do next?" Emily looked up. "Get my pilot's license," she said, for real this time. In the following days, the world couldn't get enough of her story. She appeared on every talk show. A book deal was offered. A film studio made inquiries within a week. The FAA awarded her a Certificate of Civilian Bravery, the youngest person in U.S. history to receive it. But Emily stayed grounded. She returned to school, finished her exams. She even went back to flying tiny Cessnas, this time under official instruction. At her first solo flight, her instructor left a note taped to the dashboard. "No one doubts you can fly, Emily." Now prove it to yourself." She smiled and took off with the confidence of someone who'd already landed a jet. A year later, on a bright spring morning, she stood at the gates of the United States Air Force Academy, a full scholarship awarded for her actions that day on Flight 282. She wore a crisp blue uniform, her hair tied back, and a silver pin on her chest, her father's old Air Force wings. As she walked onto the base for the first time, a group of cadets saluted her in silence. Not for her rank, but for her courage. Emily looked up at the sky, vast, clear, full of promise. "I'm ready," she whispered. She had once flown through fear. Now she would fly toward her future.